Fish Out of Water is an immaculate piece of storytelling. Often referred to as the silent episode, the story brings BoJack to a film festival in the underwater metropolis of Pacific Ocean City, where he's unable to speak or properly communicate with those around him. The episode draws inspiration from a variety of classics. In an interview, Mike Hollingsworth said, "It's BoJack Horseman in Toontown," referring to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Art director Lisa Hanawalt said, "Everyone knew it was our Fantasia." Many fans have pointed out its parallels with Sofia Coppola's Lost in Translation. The execution is truly something special. Not only is this episode a masterclass in world building, but it's just a phenomenally told visual story. The feeling that everything is vaguely familiar while still being wildly different, the difficulty to adjust to this foreign way of life, the sense of adventure through scary and dangerous terrain, and an unspoken bond that helps BoJack better understand his own shortcomings. And to that last point, the episode also explores the depths of BoJack's own guilt, specifically for the things in his life that he's left unsaid. Even more impressive, it does it with almost no dialogue whatsoever. Throughout Fish Out of Water, BoJack tries desperately to figure out how to apologize to Kelsey Jennings, which is obviously pretty difficult to do without speaking. BoJack's guilt not only stems from the incident that got Kelsey fired from Secretariat, but from his own history of leaving things left unsaid to those he cares about. He never reached out to Kelsey after she was fired from Secretariat, even though he was partially responsible for her firing. This is actually now a pattern in BoJack's life, so let's take a look back at where it started.
Generic 90s grunge song for everyone in Flanders.
In the early 1990s, Herb Kazaz was caught in a scandal and unfairly fired from the show he created, Horsin' Around. Before being fired, Herb asked BoJack to have his back when the network inevitably told him that they planned to fire Herb.
I need to know that you've got my back. If you threaten to walk, they'll listen to you.
You can count on me, Herb. I mean, I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for you.
BoJack agreed, but after a threatening conversation with Angela Diaz, he chickened out and betrayed his friend.
You're doing the right thing. I know it's hard, but if Herb's really your friend, he'll understand.
Even worse, he didn't reach out to him for nearly 25 years, until Herb got cancer. By the time BoJack did get back in touch with Herb, it was too late. He desperately sought closure and apologized for what he did to Herb, but Herb was unwilling to forgive him. And it wasn't because BoJack got him fired. It was because he abandoned his friend.
But what I needed then was a friend. And you abandoned me. And I will never forgive you for that.
Here we are a couple of years later, and BoJack is making the same mistake with Kelsey Jennings that he made with Herb. In season 2, at BoJack's suggestion, the two of them snuck into the Nixon library to shoot a scene that had been cut from Secretariat. They got the shot, but when the studio found out, Kelsey was fired from the film.
Turns out you two knuckleheads snuck out last night and got that shot I told you not to get for the scene that's not in the movie anymore. Silly me, I didn't like that, so I fired her ass.
This was, at least in part, BoJack's fault, yet he faced none of the consequences. In fact, even after walking off of the film himself, he still got the credit, glory, and accolades for the performance, despite the film using a digital recreation of his likeness. And despite having made almost this exact mistake back in the 90s with Herb, BoJack hadn't reached out to Kelsey after she was fired. Not as a colleague or as a friend.
Thanks for talking me into this, BoJack. Just so you know, I'm really glad we're making this movie together.
Didn't know I had it in me, did you?
No, I knew.
Pretty awful way to treat someone who believes in you. BoJack's struggles to figure out what to say to Kelsey when he sees her in Pacific Ocean City stem from a long history of leaving things unspoken, or not speaking until it's too late. And it's pretty brilliantly showcased in a location where BoJack is literally unable to speak. Bear with me while I detour one more time, because there's one other major instance of BoJack leaving things unspoken that affected his life in a major way that ties to this episode. And for that, we have to go back a little further.
This is a song from the 80s, the decade which it currently is.
In the 80s, before his big break, BoJack was closest with Herb and Charlotte, who were dating at the time. Because Herb and Charlotte were dating, BoJack let his attraction to Charlotte go unspoken, and she could tell. She even told him this.
Would you have made a move on me?
Charlotte.
I don't think you would have. You know why? I think you're a coward.
Even when she was leaving LA for good to go live in Maine, he didn't tell her how he felt about her. But he clearly thought about it for years. In fact, he had concocted an entire life together with Charlotte in his head, and we got to see it play out during season 1's downer ending. During this drug trip, BoJack imagined that he and Charlotte lived together in Maine, that they had a daughter named Harper, and that they were happy.
What are you thinking about?
Oh, just how nice things could have been if you had chosen this life.
It's what BoJack imagined could happen if he hadn't pursued the TV star life, and it all went unspoken. This actually came to a head in Escape from LA in season 2, after BoJack began to live with Charlotte and her family. He finally made a move on her. He finally stopped being a coward in his own eyes. But by then, it was too late.
I've wasted so much time sitting on my hands and imagining what could have been. Tell me you don't feel the same. Tell me you haven't thought about it.
I think you should go.
So by the end of season 2, BoJack has had to come to terms with 2 major friendships in his life that he ruined by leaving important things left unsaid, or ultimately saying them too late. And while his relationship with Kelsey isn't necessarily the kind of friendship he had with Herb or Charlotte, BoJack is dealing with the fact that there might be another person he respects that's going to hate him forever. So over the course of his underwater adventure, BoJack searches for the right thing to say, and being incapable of actually speaking ends up carrying him further and further away from his goal. But it's actually BoJack's imaginary life with Charlotte that connects us back to the next aspect of Fish Out of Water. After BoJack is whisked away to the outskirts of Pacific Ocean City, he witnesses a seahorse give birth on a bus, accidentally leaving one of the babies behind. In an interview with Vox about Fish Out of Water, Lisa Hanawalt talks about the design inspiration for the baby seahorse. It looks a little like Harper, BoJack's imagined daughter from his drug trip in the first season. I wanted to very subtly call back to that design, because BoJack has such a strong connection to this baby that happens very quickly, so maybe there's a little bit of that in his subconscious. So while BoJack is coping with a situation that reminds him of his unspoken failures throughout life, he's also presented with this adorable baby seahorse who has subconsciously tapped into something that deeply reminds him of Charlotte. It's his own manifestation of those things that were left unspoken for so many years. And not only that, he's dealing with the fact that he's abandoned Herb and Kelsey, and there's this creature he feels a connection with, and he knows he can't abandon them too. BoJack spends the remainder of the episode traversing this scary underwater world, doing his best to protect this baby seahorse from danger, as though it's his own imaginary daughter. And throughout the danger and suspense and fear, BoJack bonds intensely with them, to the point where it's very difficult for him to leave the baby when he finally gets them back home where they belong. As BoJack travels back to Pacific Ocean City, having missed his film premiere, he reflects on the events of that day. He looks down at the bottle of seahorse milk that he bought for the baby, and he realizes what he should say to Kelsey. Kelsey, in this terrifying world, all we have are the connections that we make. I'm sorry I got you fired. I'm sorry I never called you after. BoJack connected with that seahorse, and he also had connections with Herb and Charlotte, but he squandered them. He doesn't want the same thing to happen with Kelsey. But when BoJack arrives back in the city, he quickly settles into his typical lifestyle and partakes in his usual vices. You would hope that after all he's gone through, after all he'd learned about himself, that he'd immediately seek out Kelsey and apologize. BoJack was out of his comfort zone until the fame, success, nicotine, and booze lulled him back into it, and he tucked himself into that security blanket. Shortly after, he sees Kelsey leaving the hotel. One last chance to apologize. He chases her down, hands her the note, only to find that the ink's been smeared. She angrily hands it back and drives away. This is when BoJack learns that he could have spoken through his helmet the entire time.
Oh, you have got to be kidding.
And sadly, this is a fitting metaphor for BoJack's history of leaving things unspoken. The truth is that while for years BoJack felt like it was too late to reach out to Herb or tell Charlotte how he really felt about her, he was fully capable. He could have reached out at any time, and he didn't. He chose not to. Fish Out of Water is an incredible feat of animation for so many reasons, but it also represents so many of BoJack's shortcomings. It represents the ocean of guilt that rests on BoJack's shoulders. The guilt for abandoning his friends, for being a coward, and his struggle to cope with the fact that he might actually still be a coward. And while his intentions in this episode show that he's trying to change for the better, in the end, sadly, he doesn't. Later in the season, BoJack is given one more chance to make right by Kelsey. She asks him to help her secure funding for a passion project by starring in her movie. BoJack agrees, but in the end, the project falls through. This ultimately wasn't BoJack's fault, but Kelsey doesn't know this, and she tells him how much he let her down.
Why did I get my hopes up? Why do I keep letting you get my hopes up?
And at the end of the day, BoJack still didn't apologize. He didn't tell Kelsey he felt bad for getting her fired, or for not reaching out. He just agreed to help her, and then he let her down. And ultimately, if BoJack had known he could talk underwater, would he have said those things to Kelsey? Would he have apologized?
I don't think you would have. You know why? I think you're a coward.
Folks, thank you so much for tuning into this Fish Out of Water breakdown. I know it covered a lot more than just Fish Out of Water, but I had fun doing it. As always, let me know what BoJack episodes you want me to cover next, and stay tuned for more. Peace.
Johnny to Cellos.